Welcome to Modern Musings, conversations with the maiden, mother, and crone, looking at ourselves through the lens of the 21st century. Hello, welcome to Modern Musings. I hope you guys had a happy Mother's Day. I'm Amber, and I'm here with my two co-hosts, Kristen Hessler and Cindy Murray.
Hello.
Hello.
How's it going, everyone? And we're back today, and we're going to talk about living with mental illness. And we have a guest speaker today for the first time on our podcast. We have Ashley Roberts.
Hi, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So Ashley is the niece of Cindy and the cousin of Kristen, and she is currently going to Texas Woman's University and about to graduate with her bachelor's in psychology. And so we brought her here for this special topic because we'd like to get her unique perspective on the subject.
And also, as Ashley is a member of my family, she has also lived with the mental illness issues that are in my family. So she is seeing it from another perspective as well.
Yes, and that's definitely what we're here to do today is look at the different perspectives of mental illness. So Ashley, tell me, what exactly is mental illness?
Well, it's a little hard to define. I can give you the dictionary definition of it, which is a wide range of behaviors that affect mood, thinking, and behavior. And usually we define, or whenever we're diagnosing someone who has a mental health diagnosis, we'll usually look for what we call the 4 Ds of abnormality, which are deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger. And whenever a mental health professional is assessing someone, they'll search for signs of someone's behavior is deviating from their usual cultural norm. That's a sign. If their behavior is dangerous, if they're causing harm to themselves or others. If their behavior is dysfunctional, it's interrupting their normal daily functions in life and they're just having a lot of difficulty. And if their behavior is causing them a lot of emotional or physical distress, those are usually the signs that we will look for and that someone would progress into trying to be diagnosed, essentially.
What are some examples of mental illness?
Well, there can be several. And of course, I've mentioned cultural norms, of course, and that can kind of play into it. Every culture has a different idea of behaviors or ways of thinking that are within the norm in their culture. So it can just be very hard to define a mental health diagnosis. And even the word mental illness, there's a lot of push in psychology from even moving away from saying mental illness, because whenever we hear the word illness, we have sort of a negative association with that word. We're thinking illness, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with you, we need to fix you. So a lot of the times we just even say mental health. Someone is experiencing a problem with their mental health, or we'll say that they're having a mental health diagnosis.
Oh, I like that better because I'm not sick. I just have a different way of living. I'm not sick.
Yeah,
exactly. My brain thinks differently or whatever, yeah.
Right. When I think of illness, I think of like being sick, like having a flu and, I'm
going to be cured.
There's something wrong with you that you need to be cured. Which kind of goes back to what the early days of asylums, where they thought that people with mental disorders, mental illness needed to be cured. So they would essentially torture them.
Shock therapy.
And to bring them back to what normal, quote unquote, way of thinking, but really what is normal.
Oh, that's a good point. Like you were talking about the social norms too, because 100 years ago, social norms, maybe a promiscuous girl might have been sent to the asylum because her parents didn't understand why she was promiscuous. They thought she had a mental illness.
Right. Or a homosexual. I mean,
yes.
until not even that more
Recently.
recently. Yeah.
it's
Yes.
definitely a very
And-
recent, with the promiscuous girls, also very recent.
It can also play into culture because different cultures have different ways of behaving and different ways of thinking. And so counselors really are trying, I mean, a lot of my professors are really pushing the idea of counseling through a multicultural perspective where you're wanting to understand someone else's culture and wanting to understand, well, this is how that they view things. So maybe the way I'm helping them is not going to, vibe well with them because that's not the way that they perceive things and that's not how their cultural norm is. So I need to kind of work with them and help them in the way that they can understand.
Now, yeah, that's definitely a good way of looking at it, like coming from a different cultural perspective.
I never thought about like a therapist actually having to take into consideration someone's socioeconomical or religious background
Right.
as part of their therapy
Yes.
tools to adjust the way they give someone therapy.
Yeah, there's a ton of training that goes into it. And I mean, I'm taking an introduction to counseling class right now. And that's something that she has really stressed is if you ever find yourself in a position where you're practicing and you're working with someone and you're seeing, I'm struggling to help this person, then you're supposed to refer them to someone else and then go to someone higher up than you because that's a sign that you need to receive training and how to deal with that situation.
Right, because a therapist should never be biased against any of the things that they're offering therapy for. Yeah. I like the idea that we're moving into a more cultural acceptance, particularly in the United States, of mental illness or mental health issues being normal, that we all have. I like to often say we all have our own neuroses. We all have something that we're battling with or struggling with, or that is a little bit different than, somebody else. And so I like the idea of normalizing that and finding ways to bring that out, that culture out, where 50 years ago they might have locked grandma up in the asylum, and we would never see her again. Now it's normal to have her living at home or whatever and being taken care of and trying to find ways for that person to cope. And we're not embarrassed by the fact that we have a depressive disorder or anxiety disorder or something like that. Those are two things that would have gotten someone locked up a long time ago, and not really that long ago. So I really do like that it is becoming more the norm and we're less ashamed of that.
I think it's healthier for families too, because
yeah.
when people are open about having that conversation, you can realize that there are similarities within your family unit, so you can see patterns and things like that, and just knowing like that you can talk to your friend too about it and feel safe.
Yes. I've found that myself personally. The ability to confide in my family members that I'm depressed, that I can confide in my friends that I have anxiety, being able to recognize it and address it when I see it in another family member rather than shoving it under the rug and trying to pretend that it doesn't exist.
Well, see, that was like a commonality thing, I want to say, in my family. I mean, mainly like both of my parents for years worked at a state of Texas mental hospital. And so 17 years ago, when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, my mom looked at me and she said, there's no possible way that you could be diagnosed with that. I work with people with bipolar disorder, and there's no way that you could be like that. And I was just like, and then she comes to realize later that, your everyday person that you see on the street could have a mental disorder.
There's levels of
levels of bipolar disorder.
A spectrum, so to speak, or
pretty much, a spectrum of like, just because there's something a little bit wrong with me doesn't mean that I'm going to go out and do things outside the norm.
Yeah, just like every depressed person is not suicidal.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
in fact, there are suicidal people who aren't necessarily depressed, oddly enough.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that, Ashley?
I think going on something you were discussing earlier about how we can be more open in it and our culture is moving more towards being open with it, I definitely agree that that's something that's happening. People are kind of realizing that, I mean, therapy is very helpful to anyone. I mean, even I mentioned earlier that I'm in an intro to counseling class, and one of the things we discuss in even our textbook and through our professor is just, if you're going to become a counselor, you should consider getting therapy yourself, because you need to understand yourself and understand maybe your own problems and your own biases and be able to work through that. Because if you're unable to work through that, then you're going to have a really hard time assisting someone else.
Yeah, how can you help people if you can't help yourself?
Yeah, and the stigma is also, it goes back to culture in a lot of ways too, because in a lot of cultures, they just see therapy as, what's the point? Why would I pay someone to listen to me? I mean, that's kind of, in a lot of, I mean, in a lot of marginalized communities, therapy is also considered, you know, we don't do that, basically.
Right. We don't talk about our problems. We don't
Yeah.
share those
Definitely
things.
an old world
Right.
thinking, like just rub some dirt on it. Just you hurt yourself, rub some dirt on it, move on with your life.
Yeah.
Don't talk or think about it ever again. Sweep it under the rug.
I think too, when you're talking about cultures, you can also talk about not just, you know, America versus like
Yeah.
the East. You could also talk about men's culture and women's culture
Oh,
too,
absolutely.
because a lot of
Yeah.
men are finally being comfortable with their feelings. For so long, men have repressed their feelings
Absolutely.
as an expectation for their role.
Yes.
And
Yeah, men's roles
now
versus women's.
it is acceptable to have feelings and share your feelings. And I think, you know, kind of bouncing off of what you were talking about, making it like acceptable in society, I think a lot of people have a misinterpretation of what therapy is and what
Yes.
counseling is, and what happens during that. Like people talk about, I don't want to pay for someone to just listen to me. It's not always just about you sitting there on a couch talking.
Well, and a lot of
Yes.
people have the misnomer that you go to a therapist and the therapist tells you everything that's wrong with you, and this is how you fix it. And I believe everyone in this room right now
Yeah,
knows
you have
that.
to fix yourself.
Well,
Yeah.
and we've all been to therapy. We know what goes on there, and
Yeah,
it's
I mean-
much broader than that. My therapist is like one of my best friends. I feel that way. I can go to her and talk about almost anything. Probably could talk about anything.
It's supposed, yeah, like Ashley said, it's supposed to be an unbiased opinion. So, say if you go and talk to your best friend or your mom or somebody like that, they're going to have a biased opinion
Because they know
you. So
from their perspective. Yeah.
And if you go and talk to somebody that doesn't know you, then they can offer a unique perspective that maybe you or your family or your best friend hasn't thought of yet.
Right. And they don't tell you what to think. They don't tell you what to do. They ask you very pointed questions. You know, how does that work? What do you think of that? How is this affecting you? And they just make you look more deeply, I think,
Yes.
into yourself, where you are finding
And
the answers.
They may be able to recognize, you may say something and they may go, no, wait a minute, let's go back over that. Let's talk about that a little bit more, because that
Get that
doesn't
one a
sound.
lot.
Yeah, they can recognize things that maybe even you aren't seeing in yourself.
Yes,
because,
absolutely.
Yeah.
patterns of behavior and
Don't really-
and
Those
and
habitual
beliefs.
phrases that you
Yes.
say,
Yeah.
when you're, giving your narrative of an outcome that happened.
The stories that you
You
tell
might
yourself.
say, this always happens to me, and then they can
does
realistically
it?
point out that does
Yeah.
that really always happen
Like,
to you?
are you just like,
And-
is it in your head or whatever?
Well, they won't ever tell you it's in your
No.
head either.
No.
But they're
They'll
asking
just say,
you,
"Hey, let's back up and talk about that."
Let's talk about that. What do you mean by it always happens to you? What's going on when this happens to you? And you break it down into these little, things, and you suddenly realize, well, it happens when I do this or whatever. And it really, like I said, my therapist is like one of my best friends. I love her dearly because and I haven't even been seeing her that long. I saw her for a few sessions last year, and then I've started recently seeing her again, but she is just very open and she listens very patiently, and I feel like she really hears what I have to say. And sometimes that's the biggest thing for me, is that I feel like I need to be heard
And validated.
and she doesn't tell me that my feelings are in my head or that my feelings are unrealistic or anything like that. She just helps me work through those feelings and understand what I really am feeling and what I can do about it. But she never tells me anything. It's always in the form of a question,
Yeah, your therapist isn't going to tell you how to think or how to feel. They're just there to help you sort of work through that and find new ways to cope, find new ways to approach different things, just to kind of assess what you're doing, basically what your patterns are, and maybe how can we switch up those patterns because maybe that's not working for you.
Right.
That's
right.
like a cognitive behavioral therapist,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Are there other types?
There are so many different types of therapy. There's existential therapy, person-centered therapy, Freudian therapy. Or psychoanalysis is usually what's known as. I'm literally, the intro to counseling class that I'm taking right now, that is literally the entire class. I am going over every single type of therapy there possibly is. And honestly, your therapist doesn't just focus on one type of therapy. They will use bits and pieces from everyone. Mm-hmm. They'll decide, hey, maybe this one works best for you, maybe that one works best for you. I mean, there's not really one set way of.
So what's your favorite type that you've learned so far in school?
I would say maybe existential therapy, which is basically, it's very interesting. It comes from Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor. And he basically has the idea that everyone's life, no matter how dire their situation is, they can find meaning in their life. And he believes that we need to be able to ask ourselves questions about what our life's purpose is. And basically just to accept, I'm going to have anxiety. Life isn't forever. And I need to live in the moment. And even in the worst possible situation, I can still find something positive to cling to.
That's good. Yeah.
And we talk a lot about that
Mm-hmm.
in our podcast, living in the moment.
Living in the moment. It goes with all of our Eckhart Tolle.
And living for your true path and like your existence is meaningful.
Yeah. Because you're the one who defines what gives you meaning,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. So do you have any practical tips for someone who either has or has a family member who has mental health issues?
Well, I would think reaching out for help. There are so many hotlines out there and so many resources through the community that you can reach out for. And that's usually the hardest step, honestly, is just finding somebody, reaching out, trying to get set up with mental health services. Mm-hmm. And sadly, for some communities, it's become a little harder. Sadly, mental health access isn't accessible for everyone.
Right.
Unfortunately. Right. And that's honestly something that does need to be improved in the system, really.
Yeah.
Especially in the state of Texas. I know different people in different states have an easier time getting mental health help.
Right.
Yes.
And Texas, it's a lot harder.
Yeah, a lot of states, it's included in your healthcare benefits, but a lot of insurance in the state of Texas does not cover it. So, that is a challenge, and particularly in the more impoverished communities and stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Luckily, since COVID and quarantine, that luckily, I guess my insurance, it's now included, whereas it wasn't before.
Mine as well.
You know, so I'm glad that, it's bad that it took a pandemic for, that to happen in the state of Texas.
Well, I think people are finally starting to realize that lots of things cause mental health issues.
Yes. They're not all just birth.
Right. And and it's not all just depression or anxiety or trauma or whatever. Well, actually, obviously, COVID causes a lot of trauma. That is trauma. But they're realizing that there's a lot of factors that go into it, and that pretty much everyone right now is, and that kind of goes back to the thing I was saying earlier, that it's becoming more the norm, and it's more understood that kind of everybody has their own issues to deal with, and
the world
let's
is
just
stressful.
acknowledge them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, we're talking about living with mental health issues or whatever. We're really kind of looking at it in two different ways. It's a little bit different to have mental health things going on for yourself, as opposed to with someone that's a loved one or someone you live with or whatever. So we're looking at, you mentioned getting help. What about, that would be obviously for yourself, getting some help for yourself. And you can look online to find resources there. And even if you can't afford it, there are often free or low cost resources that can help you with your mental challenges. So don't be afraid to just do the research and just ask all the questions.
And there's so many books out now.
Oh, there's lots of books. There's lots of stuff on the internet. And, go to your pastor at your church, or sometimes your human resources people, depending on where you work. Like if you're at a hospital or something, they can point you at different things. There are lots of places that you can get that information, and those things are out there that are available. Just keep looking and don't give up.
Right. But what about when you're living with someone, like say your parent has a mental illness and you've been raised by someone with a mental illness, or your sibling has it, and the impacts of the loved ones too.
Yeah, that could be a challenge too, because having parents or a spouse that has mental illness is very, very challenging. But those resources are there also, I think, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and that's a great place to start still, is just looking online, asking your pastor, asking, different groups like that for that assistance.
And yeah, it's out there. Assistance is out there. You just have to be willing to look for it. Yeah,
I'm thinking about support groups, because I know there's probably a lot of support groups. I'm thinking of this particularly, like in my case, I'm caring for my mother who has dementia, and she's not living in the house with us anymore, but she was for a time. And I never got to make use of this resource because of COVID. So they weren't having any meetings, but there were lots of caregiver support groups for people who are living with family members with dementia. And by that same standard, there are lots of support groups for people who are, living with anxiety disorder, or are married to someone who's living with anxiety disorder,
addiction
disorders.
For family
yes,
members.
Yeah, there's lots of things like that. And I can't name any of them specifically, but I bet if you put it in, it's probably a frequently searched item on Google or whatever, So I highly encourage you to talk, and don't just talk to strangers. Talk to your friends and your family, because you'll be surprised, I think, how many of them will say, oh yeah, I had an uncle that had dementia, and he, my mom and dad were taking care of him because nobody else could, or whatever. People are more likely to talk about those things. It really just goes back to that again. Don't be afraid to talk about it. the biggest part of living with it is finding that support where you are. And that support can come in a lot of different ways, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I know it is a subject that's close to all of our hearts because we all have loved ones and we all know people that have suffered from mental disorders as well as ourselves. Like, I know I am just now at the age of 38 getting comfortable talking about my mental illness and the struggles that I go through daily, just trying to get out of bed in the morning.
Right.
And
I think one of the things when you're talking about living with a mental illness or health, when you're referring to yourself living with it, is you got to take every day one step at a time. You've got to go easy on yourself. You can't beat yourself up about it if you have a relapse or just a bad day. You know, depending on what your mental health is, some of us have bouts where it comes and goes, and then some people it's an ongoing everyday thing.
Right.
Depending on what you battle with. You know, go easy on yourself. Don't beat yourself up. You know, live in the now. Don't, you know, worry about what happened yesterday. It's already happened.
always look forward.
Yeah, move
Right.
forward.
Well, and I think that support, you know, if you have, as someone living with mental issues, you know, if you have a good support system like your spouse or someone who helps you remember to take your meds or notices when you're, you know, not behaving in your normal capacity or whatever.
Yeah,
Ask
be
you if
comfortable
you're
with that
okay.
open dialogue about
Right.
that too.
Because that I think that's helpful to have that person, you know, that has your back.
Right,
So
right.
I think that's an important part of it.
Especially
I really
when you don't realize if
Yeah, if
you're
you're-
in the middle of a bout and your spouse says, "Hey, are you feeling okay? You seem a little out of your norm," you know, and just being okay with that conversation,
Yes.
so that
Yeah, you don't have to
can
be
move forward.
okay all the time. You don't have to be, I'm good, I'm fine all the time.
Yeah, it's
Right,
okay to
right.
not be okay.
and
right.
know that your spouse isn't trying to provoke you or, you know,
Right.
they're concerned. They're genuinely concerned. And I think a lot of times that some people get afraid when, you know, their mask is down, you know, and, you know, especially when you have depression, when you suffer with like chronic depression and you're always wearing your mask, and then, you know, maybe your mask slips and someone says, "Hey, you know, everything okay? You don't seem normal." You know, don't be upset that someone
Yeah.
noticed. They
Right.
genuinely care.
Right.
And having that open dialogue with people and knowing who your safe zones are is important.
It is important to have those safe zones.
If you
Yes.
don't
Yeah.
feel safe, then that's something you need to take into consideration because your health is a priority
It
too.
is. Yes.
Yeah.
So, Ashley, have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you couldn't talk to a therapist or a certain person or a, you know, like a school counselor or whatever? What did you do, or what?
Definitely. I think that's one of the most interesting things I've noticed about receiving my education and taking this path is I've been able to sort of assess my own mental health and assess my own experiences and look back on things that have happened and sort of to understand generational trauma, which is something that we use a lot in counseling or in psychology, which I'm able to look at decisions that my parents made and that their parents made and their parents before them, and I can understand more of why those decisions were made. They weren't just doing those things just to be horrible, just terrible people to me. They were doing those things because that's what they learned. They didn't know more than
Right,
that. And
right.
I mean, I've definitely been in situations, I mean, I still struggle a lot with mental health. I mean, being a college student, I'm under a significant amount of stress, and I'm in my 30s. I'm a late in life college student, and I had a 10-year gap between high school and college. So there's a lot of imposter syndrome and a lot of anxieties and things like that. And I think a good thing about my college is that they have free mental health services offered to me. I can reach out for that. So, I mean, that also goes back into what to do if you find yourself in that situation. Like, that's a wonderful resource to have.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and I
find
think
the school, your school counselor, your college. Yeah. And like I said, sometimes your human resources department or whatever, sometimes where you work, sometimes has people in place for that. If you work in a one of those high stress fields or something where, like firefighters and policemen and the medical professionals, they live in these really high stress things, and there are resources that are available specifically to them for that. Yes. So yeah, I appreciate you helping us with the, and talking to us about this, because it is a little bit different perspective. You're coming from the same perspective that we are as someone who struggles with this. And obviously, since you are in our family, we are familiar with the generational trauma that you speak of, because it has affected us as well. And we watch some of the things that you have lived through, that were happening outside of us. But yeah, and I really appreciate you bringing that perspective along with your educational knowledge. And I realize you can't really give us any specifics because you're not a licensed therapist.
No, I'm a baby psychologist still, not even a psychologist.
Yeah, and we're not trying to get you to,
give us counseling advice.
Yeah, we're not psychoanalyzing each other or anything like that.
Not allowed to do that.
Yeah, we're really just talking about from the perspective of someone who lives with mental illness, deals with mental illness in the family,
friend to friends,
how what things can we do to help each other. And that's one of the things that I love about Modern Musings, and I hope that you listeners like it too, is that we're here for each other, and having this close bond of women, being able to share. And we have women outside of or in our circle that are not part of the Modern Musings, but they're still within our circle. And we spend a lot of time talking and sharing with them our personal points of view, and those things are very, very near and dear to us and very helpful in our growth and understanding. So, that's what I would like to encourage you listeners to find, those people in your life that you can do that with. And, if you can't do it with them, come over to the blog and, and leave comments there, or go to the Facebook chat group, and you can talk to us there, because we are willing to share we are here sharing our personal experiences with you, and in the hope that you will find some comfort in it as well.
That is one, my boss always used this phrase at work, when, you're trying to tromp along and do your daily grind, and something doesn't work, like a program doesn't work, and then you just keep going, and then every day you come across it and it doesn't work. She always says, like, well, don't just suffer in silence. Talk to someone about it, because if you just keep coming across it as an issue, a barrier in your life, but you don't reach out and let people know, no one can help you. Right. Don't suffer in silence. So if you feel like you might have mental health issue, or just have questions about it, reach out, do that research, find someone to connect with. There's no reason for anyone to suffer in silence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to circle back to a question I think that Amber had asked early on, and we've kind of touched on it in several different ways. She talked about her mother working at the state mental hospital, and in her mother's mind, someone with bipolar disorder was this person that's institutionalized,
crazy, that committed crimes,
and that far end of that spectrum of that disorder or whatever. But we all know that there could be, your next door neighbor could be living with a mental health issue. Your best friend could have a mental health issue and you wouldn't even know it if they didn't tell you. Because, if they're well cared for and they've sought treatment and they're in control or whatever, then they could be handling their mental health issues in a way that you would never know. That there's a wide variety of mental health, and that stigma of one who flew over the cuckoo's nest or whatever, that far end of the spectrum is not all there is to know about mental health. That not everybody is a schizophrenic or whatever. There's lots of different kinds of mental health issues. And I also want to talk about not just the different, like different kinds, like depression and things like that, but some of the I don't know if they're really mental health issues like dementia, some of the more neurological things like autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, some of those things. How do those fall within the mental health system?
That's a little difficult because some of those things, like ADHD, for example, shares what we call comorbid. So it's basically OCD, depression, ADHD. They can share symptoms. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the times if someone maybe has ADHD, they may also have symptoms of OCD as well. So, and as far as autism and things like that, there is some kind of back and forth. Does this belong in a mental health field? Does this belong in just health? There's a lot of discussion.
Right.
There's not really a clear answer, unfortunately, I don't think about.
But there, as you are aware, there's a lot of different kinds of mental health, like starting with just simple depression.
Yes.
And not all depression is the chronic depression that, it could be a situational depression
or seasonal.
Or a seasonal affective disorder. Things like that. Or something that, happened, you lost your job, therefore you are depressed.
And then you have PTSD.
Which also is the trauma. Yeah, the traumas. And lots of things cause trauma. A lot of people, I know, I've had this discussion with some other friends that there's a lot of things that can cause PTSD besides war.
Yes.
We've talked, Ashley and I have actually talked about this, that, a lot of people associate PTSD with soldiers coming back from the war and the things that they saw. But sometimes things that happen to children in childhood can also cause PTSD.
Bad relationships can cause PTSD.
Yes, and a simple car accident that is
exactly,
and it doesn't even have to be a severe car accident.
Yeah.
Lots of things can cause PTSD, and that's another one of those kind of invisible illnesses, for lack of a better word. It's something that you wouldn't necessarily know. There is a person in this room that has PTSD. There may be 4 people in this room that have PTSD.
I was about to say, I know I have it from being in a car accident and then the incident on a fair ride that happened to me.
Why don't you talk to us about those?
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Because
just looking at me and talking and working with me, or just passing me by at the grocery store, you wouldn't know that I suffer from that. But if you have me as a passenger in your car, then that's a whole nother story. And you will probably never want me to be a passenger in your car ever again because I'm not a very good passenger. I've almost grabbed a steering wheel from someone while they were driving, and I have flailed my arms out. I've yelled and screamed.
She scares me all the time.
And I've literally had to just revert to sitting in the back seat. I'm glad when there's more than 2 people in the car so I can opt to sit in the back seat. I was on a ride at the fair where the ride, kind of goes upside down in a big circle, and the safety mechanism on the seat malfunctioned, and my seat was not properly securing me. So every time we went upside down, I was like falling out of my seat in the fair ride, and I was like holding on for dear life, and it caused PTSD. And I actually didn't realize what had caused it until, I went to therapy and, was really working it out. Like, I had been in a car accident and we thought maybe that's what it was. But then just kind of like talking about it and going backwards in time, we realized, oh, I bet it's from that fair ride. And I actually like didn't get on a ride anywhere. I was afraid to fly in an airplane, riding the bus, riding a train. I just had this like complete fear of loss of control. And that, talking about living with someone who has, mental health, my family had to learn to cope with my mental health issue that I was battling, because it made it difficult for their life.
Right.
So those are things that people go through that we might discount because it's not something that you see all the time.
Well, and some people may have told you were overreacting.
Oh gosh, yes. I can't tell you how many times people got offended by me because I'm like crying in the car and I'm having a panic attack. Like, I'm in tears and they're just driving, down the road. And, seeing the brake lights on the car in front of me would make me just instantly start panicking and crying. And drivers would get upset with me, and I'm talking about drivers that are my friends. Mm-hmm. And that, that's kind of like having that open conversation with people and being with people that you trust who can understand you. And
once you explain to them, I have PTSD about cars. It makes me really nervous, and I might make some noises, or I might grab your arm or something like that. And see, I have the same problem with, like ladders and heights and things, because as a child, twice in my childhood, once in about first or second grade, and then another time in third grade, I fell from a large height. Kids are wont to climb trees and swing their legs over and slide down the pole off the balcony and, flip around on the handlebars of the monkey bars or whatever, And I actually was kind of doing some hanging from the clothesline one time and fell off the clothesline flat on my back backwards. And then another time, like a year or two later, I was sliding off the pole like a fireman's pole down the pole off of the balcony, and fell and landed flat on my back on concrete. I don't know how I didn't just break my back, but now, back then I had no fear of climbing in the trees or anything, but now I have this extreme fear of climbing. Even when I get up on a step or two of the step ladder, I feel very shaky if I don't have something to hold on to, and it just makes me panic. And sometimes I can go up, but I can't come down, because my problem wasn't going up, it was coming down when I fell. So that's another one that I have, and nobody would know that, but that is a mental health issue. And it does affect me in doing things, because when I have to decorate the top of the Christmas tree or get up to the top shelf of the bookcase to get a book down, it affects me. And so, it affects my daily life in a lot of ways. So, and do you have anything like that, Amber or Ashley?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, I probably have, when I was little, and, don't get me wrong, I love dogs, but I am very cautious around little dogs. Mm-hmm. And Kristen doesn't even know that she has little dogs, and she probably wouldn't even know this, if I haven't, because I'm really good at like masking it. Like I will, I love dogs, and especially from a distance, but when I was little, my cousin had a little Cocker Spaniel, and when I was little, that dog bit me in the face. And so I do not get my face near dogs, or at least I try not to. I don't like dogs to lick me on the face or jump in my lap. And if you watch me close enough when I'm handling a dog, if a dog gets near my face, I'll back up a little bit.
I remember in college, one of your friend's dogs bit you in the face.
That happened again in college, and I'm just
they just go for your face.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been bitten by probably like 3 times by a dog in the face, and maybe dogs like realize that.
They probably sense your fear.
They can sense my fear, so they're going to
I always knew you weren't a dog person, so.
Yeah. It's not that I don't hate dogs. I love dogs. It's just that because I've been bitten so many times by dogs, it's really hard for me to get super close to a dog.
So what is that, Ashley, when your fear manifests into physical symptoms?
Phobia. I mean,
thank you.
Pretty much.
Yeah, phobia. I was like, I know there's a thing for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like yours is like a phobia
of
your
heights. I do. I have a fear of heights. I do. And it's really crazy because I can go to Six Flags and ride a ride, but it makes me very nervous. Very, very nervous and very nervous till I get up there and till it starts. And then I'm kind of, while it's going on. But then when it's over with, I'm like, God, that was fun. That was so much fun. But it's
initial anxiety.
It is. I have a lot of anxiety starting it. It's not the same climbing a ladder, though. The ladder is nerve-wracking going up, coming down. Well, I mean, it's really coming down. But, and while I'm at the top, not going up. But,
I have a fear.
I don't have fun at that.
Of heights and ladders, and so I'm going to tell an embarrassing story. This was a Mother's Day that I came late to Mother's Day. This was like probably 5 years ago. I had to change the filter on the air conditioner. And in our old house that my old roommate and I used to live in, there was the garage, had the attic stairs, that come unfolded from the ceiling. And then the air conditioner was just inside, but you had to like go in the hole of the ceiling to get into the attic. It wasn't like I could stand halfway up the ladder to change the filter. I had to go in the attic. And I don't know if you haven't ever gotten on one of those ladders, then you are lucky. They're not very stable, and they kind of bend.
Oh my gosh, I hate
wobble.
Like I hate those
I don't
ladders.
know what
I
did,
hate ladders.
But I got turned around, and then I couldn't figure out how to get out, and I just stood in the attic and cried for like 30 minutes because I couldn't figure out how to get out of the attic.
Oh my gosh!
I feel like that has happened to me
scared.
before.
Yes,
like,
I was traumatized, and it was May, and in Texas, your attic is about 130 degrees. It's hot, and I was dressed up for Mother's Day, and I had like makeup done and everything, and I just thought I was going to go up there real quick and change the filter, and I guess I let my phobia get the best of me.
Yeah.
Well, you haven't ever done that, have you? Let your phobia get the best of you?
I don't drive. I mean, that would probably be...
Yeah.
I mean, most people don't realize I kind of tell people I'm just being environmentally friendly. But, I have horrible phobia of driving. It just triggers, because I have anxiety disorder as well, and that just triggers my anxiety disorder. I don't like the feeling of driving. I prefer to walk or take the bus. So
that's truly living with mental health disorders.
But you've learned to cope with it. You've found ways that help you cope with that, right?
Found ways to socially cope with it by telling people without having to like go into your whole background.
Right. Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
Well, I think I don't know. I had a height story to tell, but we're going like.
No, it's good. I like the sharing because I felt like when you talked about being afraid on the ladder, that normalized it a little bit.
It does. That's why I say it. That's why I keep trying to encourage us to share those stories, because it does.
Because the whole idea is that you're living with it, and we are sharing with other people that we do live with it. We are not like up on some pedestal just because we have a podcast or a blog, for crying out loud. Yeah. That's everybody's blog is all about how their life is so hunky dory, and
I live this perfect life. That people put on Facebook all the things that are perfect in their life. Oh, look at this awesome dinner. Look at this cute dress. Look at this vacation.
And now I wish I had taken a picture of myself, looking down the hole in the ladder.
Right.
And, talked about that
Yeah.
instead of waiting until 5 years later to actually tell someone about that. Because I don't think I've ever told anyone about that.
No, she didn't. She didn't say anything. She didn't even. Yeah, when she came to Mother's Day.
Yeah,
or
this
anything,
is the first time I've heard about it.
Yeah.
So.
But it was traumatic to me. Like, it, in a sense, it like ruined my day,
Oh yeah.
you know?
I could tell the story about, like, I won't wear shoes with, like, a heel anymore.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, speaking of a height story, as far as, I mean, I can tell you guys, like, Kristen knew me back, like, right when I got out of high school, how I used to love to wear platform shoes and heels and stuff like that. And I have, like, 2 incidences in my past where I had worn, like, some fancy shoes and went out dancing, and I broke my knee. And so for the longest time, I couldn't get up on heights because I was afraid. Like, every time I stepped wrong or did anything wrong, I would get, like, the sensation and the feeling of ripping the cartilage in my knee, in my head. And it was just like every time I climbed up on something and I imagined falling and landing on my knee, I would get that sensation and I would just shudder. Well, you know, after a while, you know, that kind of goes away and your knee gets better. And then a few years ago, you know, I started wearing heels and stuff again. You know, I lost a little bit of weight, started wearing heels and stuff again. And platform shoes kind of started coming back out. And so I bought a pair of these really cute platform sandals. And then, lo and behold, I'm coming back from a school trip at work. And I'm wearing my platform sandals. And I step in a hole and break my foot.
Oh. Yeah.
And so now, like, I can't even, like, try on heels or platform sandals because I feel like I'm gonna, like, trip and break my foot again or fall in a hole or something like that.
Ashley, is there anything significant where, like, repetitive, like, physical trauma becomes where something manifests into a mental health?
Trying to think. I mean, I think it could just be conditioned into you.
A conditioned response, yeah.
Yeah.
That if I'm going to wear something with a heel, that I'm going to fall and
because
break
you
something.
had that
It's a
experience.
pain avoidance.
Yeah, you.
Yeah.
But it can manifest into something more serious if not treated, because then you will constantly try to do whatever you can to avoid pain.
Right.
Yeah.
Some people would go as far as to stop wearing shoes because they would say, like, the shoes cause the pain.
Yeah.
And then that becomes like a OCD almost type of ritual.
I
Yeah,
get
there's
that.
a lot of things like that. Yeah. And like you were saying, it's good for us to share these things because, you know, it's good to normalize these things. Everybody has their own neuroses. That's what I always say. So
I
Yeah,
mean,
everybody has a thing.
You can look at me. I'm a psychology student. I was diagnosed with clinical depression at 10 years old and anxiety soon thereafter. And I mean, speaking about PTSD, I was homeless for a period of time after my mother passed away. So I have PTSD from that. I have still PTSD from realizing things about my childhood, and you would never know by looking at me or even probably talking to me for a shorter period of time unless I shared it with you. So that kind of goes to show, you know, mental health problems really are there. I mean,
they're an
Yeah.
invisible. They're an invisible. What are they? I've heard people call it that, the invisible illness or whatever, and don't just assume that because you don't see people hurting on the outside that they aren't dealing with something on the inside. And it's really important that we understand people that have problems or that are having emotional health issues or whatever, that we accept those issues and normalize them into our society. and that we're a little bit more kind about it. And,
That's exactly what I was about to say. The takeaway for me right now is just to be kind to people, because you don't know what
you don't know what
everyone's
happened.
battle is.
You're right. You don't know who's having the bad day. And there was a story that used to circulate on the internet about the little boy, and he used to go home, and every day the bigger boys would pick on him or whatever, and pick on him until one day he wasn't there anymore. And they started asking, what happened, and the little boy had killed himself, and he was like a 10-year-old boy or something. And suicide is, it's a mental health problem, and you can't undo it. And you don't know when someone is having a problem, or they're having a really bad day, and your lack of understanding of where they're at, your unkindness might push them over the edge. And that's not saying that it would be your fault, but
Right.
why would you want to contribute to that? And let's all be a little kinder and try to help them away from that ledge.
You know what? That brings it all back to creating that new earth.
Oh, absolutely.
Eckhart Tolle.
Everything
Everything
comes
comes
back
back to
to
Eckhart Tolle.
Eckhart Tolle.
Like creating that new earth and being
Yes.
kind and stepping away from the ego.
and realizing that what's happening with them is not, it's not meant
Their
to hurt
true
you.
self, it's their ego taking over.
And just be more understanding of people. Yeah. Did you have something to add there, Miss Ashley?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, I guess that's about all for our podcast. I want you guys to click on our blog and comment on our blog. Follow us on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Modern Musings MMC. Check out our Facebook group, MMC Chat, and or send us an email, info@modernmusings.net. And let us know what you think of our topic today, living with mental illness. Do you have any stories to share? Please let us know, and let's continue the conversation. We would also like to thank our sponsors and the people that provide our equipment, Creative Audio Tech, and Red Door Studios. Okay, well, also, we have a topic coming up next week. What's our topic, Kristen?
Next week, we're going to be talking about favorite morning routines.
Ooh, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely tune in next week and listen to us talk about morning routines and share your morning routine. And special thanks to Ashley Roberts for joining us in the studio today. It was a great time listening to her perspectives on psychology and mental health.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we hope to have you again sometime, maybe.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
It's very enlightening.
Okay, guys. Well, we will see you next week. Not really, but
She always gets that in.
Every
She sneaks it in on purpose.
I know. I did this time. I did it on purpose. Okay, bye, guys.
Bye.